Welcome to 1M3Y, a personal development podcast where we share about how to achieve your goals and speak to successful entrepreneurs and other key opinion leaders. My name is Joe.
And I'm Kerwin. So for this week's episode, we have a special guest with us. Hi, Neelesh.
Hi, guys.
So let me give you a short introduction about Neelesh and then let's move on with our conversation. Neelesh is an experienced CEO, entrepreneur, academic administrator, and content developer with over 30 plus years of experience managing regional teams, advising C-suite executives on media, tech, innovation, and education. He is also the founder and CEO of AKADASIA and now the Senior Associate Director at US Enterprise. So Neelesh, would you like to just share a little bit more about yourself and also how do you get into entrepreneurship?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kevin and Joe. Thanks for having me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I mean, like you mentioned me during the introduction, I mean, I've been around for about 30 plus years. Almost most of the time from those years has been in Singapore. And I've also spent some time, building startups in New York and in India. But I mean, my background primarily has been media, technology, education, and startups. I've built 5 companies, 2 exits, 3 exits, 2 massive failures, and I learned more from the failures than from my, small exits. Yeah, so but very happy to be here, and more than looking forward to sharing information with you guys.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Neelesh. Perhaps I would just like to highlight something that stands out after I read your portfolio. Maybe you can give us a brief introduction about AKADASIA and what made you start AKADASIA.
Sure. So AKADASIA was started in 2019. Prior to that, I was at Singapore Polytechnic for almost about 9.5 years. I was in fact their founding director for their entrepreneurship center called Spinoff. Okay. And so finally in 2019, I decided to put my money where my mouth was and launched my 5th company called AKADASIA. This is, of course, before COVID. And the idea for AKADASIA back then was completely different. What I realized at that point was that learning management systems were not widely used across Asia Pacific. Singapore is, of course, an anomaly. We were using Blackboard and, various other learning management systems, but across Asia, only the elite schools were pretty much had access to, that kind of technology. So what I wanted to build was primarily a learning management platform for the mass markets, which would be affordable and also available in different regional languages, right? To make it accessible.
Yeah.
But of course, in 2020, we were all under a lockdown. And although at that point, all schools were running helter and skelter to get the learning management platforms, we could not get many sales, primarily because, we realized schools in Asia Pacific do not make purchases by credit cards. Because banking, everything is shut down, right? So, and in the interim, you had, other major players like Google and Microsoft who were, making their technology available to schools for free. So, of course, if you're a school in the middle of a small community, and if Google or Microsoft gives you stuff for free, what you're going to get? You're going to get the free stuff, right? So we lost a lot of, business in that sense. And so we had to pivot. And what we realized was at that point, very early on, that even though all these schools were, making these free installations of these learning management platforms, the academics or the teachers had no clue how to use these platforms to build quality content and engaging content for their students. And if you recall, in 2020, there were so many news reports about, teachers basically on Zoom having a very hard time teaching lessons on Zoom and students playing pranks on teachers. Yeah. And, all kinds of stuff, right? All kinds of stuff. So that, when we started digging deeper, we realized that, hey, this could be something that, we should tackle.
So, Neelesh, how you mentioned that you had 3 successful startups in 2 failures and learn more about failures. Maybe we would like to know, what are some of the challenges you face from having experiences that you had?
I think like any startup founders, there are several challenges, that I faced as well. I mean, I think the initial challenge was, especially when I was younger, in my earlier days, when I was your age, perhaps,
Yeah.
those days the challenges were different. Now the challenges are, vastly different. So back then, I think the challenge was, what business should I set up? That was the first challenge, and once you tackle that, then how do I really start up? Because remember, in my time, I didn't go to any startup school. There was no business. I mean, I'm not a business school graduate. Nobody taught me how to do this. Right? I mean, the concept of mentoring and all was not really that prevalent. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't like as wide as it is now.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, we had to kind of figure things out by chance, by making mistakes, and then you make a mistake and you go like, oh, okay, this doesn't work, trial and error kind of a thing. So that was a huge challenge. And of course, raising capital was a huge challenge back then. Back then capital was very tight. You couldn't just go and say, I want to start up, just like how today, I mean, you could come up with any crazy idea. And if anybody believes in you, believes in your vision, chances are you could, eventually raise capital. But back then it was very, very difficult.
Maybe you can just share with us, like, how did you did your first fundraise in your startup?
Well, I didn't raise any funds in my first startup. So my very first startup was by fluke. So I started my career as a recording engineer and a music producer. Okay. So this is in New York, and I was doing a lot of television commercials back there. Jingles, or Pepsi's, all these kind of things. And I did that for several years, actually. I mean, I was working at a really pro level back then. And then I had my first child, or my only child, rather. And, I realized that, I would come back home and he wouldn't recognize it because I was working in nights. So that was kind of, a shocking thing for me because, I'm holding my child and this guy's freaking out. So I thought about, doing something else, like a day job, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything else. I mean, I was into media, I was into recording music and stuff, and all of that, pretty much happens at nights. The only thing I knew was to build recording studios. So I set up my first business helping out a friend who basically asked me whether I can help him build his recording studio. So I said, well, okay, I can do that, but I'm going to charge you for it. And can you give me a testimonial?
Yeah.
And that's how it all started. So that was my first business where, it was less me, myself, and the very first MacBook, which I had was a black laptop back then, one of the earliest laptops. And I was basically designing studios for clients. And that business grew to the point where I exited eventually. I was acquired. So I was an acqui-hire, and one of the largest film schools in Asia was my client, and I went on to work for them for 6 years. So, but yeah, I didn't raise any capital. I basically just started with my laptop and some people I knew, and it just grew and grew and grew. But in hindsight, I think I sold less than what I should have. Because the moment I quoted my price at that point,
You took it.
negotiation.
Okay.
That was a lesson as well.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson. Interesting. But you come a long way, from starting in the media industry, the recording, having your own company, building recording studios. It's actually something like a consultancy of sort. And then now you are in entrepreneurship and education space. So maybe you can tell us how did you transition through this? How did you get there?
So I think if you really think about it, one trait that is very important for most entrepreneurs to have is the ability to transition between different things, pivot. You pivot. I mean, no matter what the situation presents, how the situation is presented to you, you need to be able to figure a way out and move forward, right? So I'm lucky that, and I'm very thankful that I have been blessed with that trait. So basically the way I got into education was after my first acqui-hire, where I went on to work as a chief technology officer for the largest film school in Asia. So I was in New York, and then I flew back to Bombay, and I worked there for about 6 years. So that was my entry into the education space. Again, I was doing media. I was building, media technology solutions, broadcast studios, IT, integration and all of that. But it was more towards, education in that sense.
Yeah.
That allowed me to really take a look at technology from an education institutional perspective. What are the educators looking at? How do they make purchasing decisions? Blah, blah, blah. And it also allowed me to really talk to a lot of other educators back in India to figure out what they were doing. And again, this is way back when technology was, very, very nascent in education. And then from there, when I left, I was headhunted to move to Singapore. So I actually spent a year at Republic Polytechnic. So I was helping Republic Polytechnic build their media schools, recording studios.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I spent a year there before I left to, start my second business, which was a real tech startup. But again, we were building recording consoles based on touchscreens. This is before the iPads. Back then, we had a Surface. The Microsoft Surface was as big as a table.
Yeah.
So we were building a whole audio mixing console with on the Surface. So that's how the transitions have happened. So and then eventually, when one of my companies died, and I lost everything financially, I had to kind of find a job to pay bills, because by that time my son was going to school, and I had literally $0 to pay anything. Right. So the first offer I got was from Singapore Polytechnic to come on board as a senior lecturer, to teach audio music production. I took it up and did that for 2 years before I transitioned into the entrepreneurship thing that I always wanted to do. And then I started building the Entrepreneurship Center for SP, and eventually became its founding director. And then, it's basically moving from media to education to technology. It's been a pretty seamless transition.
I think there's a lot of hurdles, I'll say, and a lot of sharp turns along your way. And I think, and you're still in the entrepreneurship scene and education space. So can I just ask, what makes you excited about it? What makes you excited about this entrepreneurship or this education space in Asia?
So let me get a bit philosophical. All right. What really excites me about this is primarily because we have one life to lead. That's it. This is the only opportunity we have. And if we waste this time, that's it. Right. And to me, I would not like to kind of waste my time doing things that I don't enjoy. I wouldn't like to waste my time working with people that I don't want to work with. I wouldn't want to waste my time living in places which I don't want to live in. This is it. This is one life that I have. So that's why I am super excited about what I do, because I've been lucky to have had the experiences that I've had, good, bad, whatever it may be. I've been lucky to have met the people that I've had the opportunity to work with, live with, grow up with. What else is there beyond that, right? So if I have now the opportunity to still be part of an ecosystem where I can still contribute, and in a different way, maybe not as a startup founder, but maybe supporting startup founders, building bridges, building partnerships across different ecosystems in the region. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, it's a brilliant job, and I love it. So like I said, one life to live. You make the most of it, and you better do what you like doing. So that's what gets me excited. Wake up every morning. Yes, let's go.
Yep, I agree with you, Neelesh. I think entrepreneurship is extremely exciting. And at the same time, maybe like also as a student right now, right, we are also very passionate about entrepreneurship and the space. But I think there are some barriers that perhaps innately the education system in Singapore actually prevents students from being radical. So in your opinion, what do you think are like some barriers that students would face in Singapore when it comes to entrepreneurship? Yeah.
Great question, and let me kind of give you a different perspective on this. This is not the first time I've heard this from students. I've been working with students in Singapore for almost more than a decade now. All right, I probably have mentored more than 500 plus student startups. So I've heard this question several times before, and this is my perspective on it. I'm sure when you're in school, a lot of teachers have probably told you that it's good to think outside the box, right? Think outside the box, right? I disagree with it. I think you should learn first to think within the box. So what do I mean? Think of the box as your constraints, whatever those constraints might be. So if you're saying that, the education system or whatever, those are, in my mind, constraints that you have, correct? So if you can learn to be creative and be successful in spite of those constraints, you could be successful anywhere. So in fact, I always encourage my mentees and my students to learn how to live within the constraints. And as a startup founder, this is perhaps the most important skill that you need to develop, because as a young startup founder, you will never have all the resources that you want to build a world-class company. Never. You need to build a startup based on whatever resources you have available at that particular time. And if you still can't make it, then even if I give you $1 million or $1 billion, you will still never make it. Okay? Because what you need, apart from more than the resources, what you need is the tenacity to find your way through these hurdles that you have. And I spent 3 weeks in India, for an US. And one thing I learned there, even when I was living there before, this is something that I learned there. In India, they have this term they use called jugaad. Okay, it's basically the Indian version of innovation, right? But the way they use it is that, I don't have this particular part which I need to repair my car, for example. They will do jugaad. They will basically build something which kind of fits whatever the original part is supposed to do and make it work somehow. It may be made of the cheapest materials. It may not be durable. It may perhaps not last for a long time, but it'll get you from point A to point B. Okay, so to answer your question again, if there are constraints, so be it. That's great. In fact, that's fantastic. That's the opportunity for you to really shine and show everybody that regardless of the constraints, you made it.
Wow, that's interesting.
I'm speechless. So I never look at it that way about not working with. It's not about just working with what you have, but selling with what we have. Yeah.
It's such an important skill. I mean, we talk about entrepreneurs being tenacious and they need to be resilient and all of that. But what does that really mean? At the end of the day, you need to be able to find your way through regardless of what comes your way.
Oh, yes. Wow. Well said. I'll just say it's really well said. And actually, all this, when you share, it got me so excited to know, like, wow, I feel like I want to be an entrepreneur now in a proper way, in the sense of work with what I have. And then I'm also just very curious, if let's say, what about any exciting upcoming projects that you're actually working on that you are particularly excited about?
Well, at the moment, I'm with NUS Enterprise, so I'm very excited being a part of the team there. Yeah, I mean, we are working on a whole bunch of exciting new projects, new locations perhaps coming up for NOC.
Mm-hmm.
I can't mention exactly what those locations are at the moment, but there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I'm very happy to work with the team at NUS Enterprise and contribute my experience and my network to kind of support the ecosystem and support all of you, the students.
Yeah. So, as in that's one more question. So maybe how would you plan on supporting the students?
Well, I've already started. So I've already met a few of your student startups. The peers who are building startups, and they've come to me for advice. So that's something that I can definitely, offer. I've also committed to supporting the hangar. So in fact, I'm going to be, I think, joining formally as a mentor for the hangar. I mean, when it comes to mentoring, it's not just providing business advice, but also, connections. If there are connections which people need, they can reach out to me. But with a caveat that the connections can only be made once I am convinced that this is worth the connection. Because remember, when you're introduced to somebody with a warm connection, you want to go in with something that that you can ask for immediately. You don't want to waste that connection.
That's
right, because that might be the only opportunity you have to meet this person.
Yeah.
So you want to make the most of it, right? But yeah, I mean, I've already started helping the students, mentoring the students. I've committed to being a part of the hangar, and this is just the beginning. I've only been in NUS Enterprise for 5 months. So
yeah, very very nice to actually speak to you. I think it's been very eye opening for both Kerwin and I. Perhaps one last question here for today's chat would be, if there's only one advice you can give to young entrepreneurs or student entrepreneurs, what is this one advice you would give them?
Can I give two?
Sure.
Well, I think the first one is what are you afraid of? I see a lot of students who have some amazing ideas, who are scared to start up. They come to me and say, "Oh, I don't want to start up primarily because it's tough, and maybe I want to kind of get some experience first, and then I want to start up." So to those students, I would like to tell them is, what are you afraid of? In fact, now is the time to really experiment and try this out, because even if you fail, the chances of you getting hired for a job would actually be far better than you just going out for a job interview right after your university, right? Why is that? Primarily because even if you're a ex-founder of a failed startup, the kind of knowledge you would have gained building your startup would be very, very valuable to any company. Now, can you imagine if between the both of you, say, for example, if Kerwin, you started a business before and you failed, and maybe Joe, you just, went from university directly to apply for the job. And if I'm the employer, both of you submitted your resumes to me. I'm looking at your resume. Who do you think I'm going to talk to first?
Both of you, more experience, I guess.
I mean, considering, say, maybe both of you have perfect GPA, you've got your CCAs, you've traveled a lot, great. But at the end of the day, who has more experience? Who can help me, with providing value to my clients? Yeah. In this example with Joe, I might have to kind of spend more time training him and getting up to speed. Whereas with Kerwin, perhaps that time might be far less because he already knows what it takes to really run a business. So my chances of hiring Kerwin would be a lot more in this aspect. The second, of course, is if you were to wait and start up later, say maybe at my age, right? Your responsibilities are different. You might be married, you might have kids, you might have to pay bills, and it's a huge risk. I mean, for me, when I launched AKADASIA in 2019, it was a huge risk because my son was still in Polytechnic at that point.
Yeah.
And, I've got bills to pay and a life to live, and it's super, super tough. You will really think whether you should really do this at that age. Of course, people do it. I'm not saying they don't. But then you really have to be crazy, like just kind of jump in there and take that big, huge risk to kind of go and do this. So, now is the time to really experiment. I'm not saying now is the time to start a company and, work towards it to be a unicorn. No. What I'm saying is now is the time to start up and see what you can do with it. See what you can do with it. You might be successful. That's great. But if you're not, even then, it's fantastic because the knowledge you will gain, you will never be able to gain it anywhere else. Right? So that's one. The second advice I want to give is don't just follow your passions. Okay? I see a lot of startup founders starting companies for the wrong reasons. They want to be their own boss. They want to make a lot of money. And they're very passionate about this particular idea or this problem which they want to solve. So I would probably advise them to think about it, because at the end of the day, passion does not put food on the table.
Yeah.
Okay, what puts food on the table is hunger. You need to be hungry. You really need to be hungry for success. You may be very passionate, and passion can get you started, but passion cannot sustain you. You need to be extremely, voraciously hungry. And if you're not, then you just start up for an experiment, learn, quit, go work somewhere else. Those are the two things.
Wow, that's what a great way to end it. And honestly, I feel that it's what you say about being hungry is really, it struck me a lot. Like you mentioned, passion really cannot put food on the table, and that really, I really hold dear to my heart what you just said just now, and I think that is great advice, really great advice for anyone who actually wants to do a startup, you want to actually explore the scene, especially as they are still students right now. So thank you so much, Neelesh, for your time. Actually, I really appreciate our conversation today. Yeah. And for all our listeners out there, any comments for Neelesh or you want to contact him, you can just drop us a DM on our Instagram or TikTok, and we can link you up with you. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's great. No problem at all. You have my contact details, so you can definitely link up anybody who needs help.
Yeah, great. And we have our full episodes on Spotify and YouTube. And with that, thank you so much for listening. Yes.
Thanks, guys.